Beneath the smoke of battlefields and the ruins left behind, there are shadows that never surrendered. Locked in steel vaults, scattered in forgotten tunnels, they wait. Fragments of a war that refused to die. The maps that shouldn't exist. The engines that never made a sound. The sealed orders inked in blood and lies. We're not meant to see them, but the ground still shifts where they were buried. On April 10, 1945, 3 days after the U.S. First Army secured the town of Nordhausen, an advance unit from the British 11th Armored Division was redirected to a remote sector in the Harz Mountains. Their orders, stamped "Most Secret," came via London and made no mention of strategic objectives. Instead, the message instructed Major Colin Havers to locate subterranean industrial assets of high value, believed to be under SS guard. The unit's interpreter, Sergeant Walter Brandt, a German-born émigré, later testified that locals in the nearby hamlet of Ilsenburg were evasive when questioned about the rail spur leading into the wooded ridge known as Klein Wernberg. The spur appeared on no Allied topographic maps, but aerial photographs taken the previous week by RAF reconnaissance flights showed 2 flat cars abandoned at a narrow-gauge loading dock, flanked by heavy timber doors built into the hillside. When the British troops approached, they found the tunnel sealed by a steel blast door welded shut from the inside. Cutting torches were requisitioned from a captured Wehrmacht depot in Wernigerode, and after 3 hours, the door gave way to a corridor descending sharply into darkness. The air was dry and heavy with a metallic odor. Electrical conduit ran along the walls, leading to junction boxes labeled Kraftwerk Sud. At 120 meters inside, the team reached a junction where 3 rail lines split. One led to a cavern containing rusted machine frames and crates marked with the insignia of Organization Todt. Another curved toward a flooded shaft, the water opaque and slick with oil. The third line was blocked by a pile of wooden pallets and debris that looked hastily arranged, as if to conceal the passage beyond. Field notes from Major Havers, preserved in a War Office folder until 1973, describe finding an unusually large copper busbar assembly in the main chamber. A handwritten edition in red pencil reads, "Not munitions storage, possible experimental power transfer." No further elaboration appears in the file. An RE bomb disposal team was summoned after engineers discovered a booby-trapped transformer near the busbar. While the device was defused without casualties, the incident delayed exploration of the sealed branch. By the time the obstruction was cleared on April 12, orders arrived from SHAEF to halt all activity and await a joint Anglo-American inspection team. This team never arrived. Instead, a U.S. Army transportation convoy appeared on the 14th under the command of Captain Henry Lowry, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. British personnel were told their assistance was no longer required. That same night, multiple truckloads of crates and equipment were seen leaving the site under canvas covers. The tunnel was resealed, this time with reinforced concrete. In 1946, the War Office requested copies of all engineering reports from the site. The U.S. Army replied that no such installation was recorded in their operational logs. The British files were subsequently reclassified and filed under Eisenklaue, pending review. Over the next decade, occasional fragments surfaced. In 1951, a civilian surveyor mapping the ridge for a forestry project located a buried cable conduit running from the tunnel entrance toward an abandoned substation 3 kilometers east. The substation's records, still intact, indicated a constant draw of 4.2 megawatts in March 1945, an extraordinary load given the region's lack of above-ground industry at the time. Witness testimony from surviving Wehrmacht engineers, interrogated in 1948 by British military intelligence in Minden, suggests that Eisenklaue was overseen by SS Obersturmbannführer Karl Vetter, attached to the Forschungsgemeinschaft für Kriegsgerät. One engineer, Erich Mertens, recalled that the core of the project was removed by truck convoy toward the Bavarian border on April 7. Mertens was unable or unwilling to explain what the core consisted of. No trace of Vetter appears in Allied prisoner rosters, nor in post-war denazification court records. His last confirmed appearance is in a Waffen-SS staff list dated February 1945. A 1964 CIA internal memorandum, declassified in part in 2003, notes that Subject Vetter may have been exfiltrated to South America via Rathlin channels in late 45. The physical site of the Eisenklaue Tunnels remains inaccessible. In 1978, the East German government, which had jurisdiction over the Harz region after the war, designated the area as a military exclusion zone. Satellite imagery taken in 1989, shortly before the fall of the Berlin Wall, shows the original loading dock replaced by a concrete apron and guardhouse. No official explanation has been given. In 1991, following German reunification, a Bundestag inquiry sought to locate any surviving records. Ministry of Defense archivists reported that relevant East German military files were likely destroyed during the final days of the GDR. When British researchers petitioned for access to their own Eisenklaue dossiers, they were informed the material had been misplaced during interdepartmental transfers. What remains today are fragments, a handful of reconnaissance photographs, a few blurred engineering diagrams showing equipment of unclear purpose, and Major Haver's terse field notes. The questions linger: what required such power in an underground facility weeks before Germany's surrender, and why the urgency to remove its contents before Allied forces could inspect them? The last surviving member of Haver's unit, Corporal Alan Renshaw, gave a brief interview in 2004. When asked about the site, he paused for a long moment before saying, "We thought we were looking for weapons. But whatever was down there, whatever they took, it wasn't meant to be fired. It was meant to run." Renshaw died 3 months later. His personal effects included a folded copy of the original Most Secret Orders, the ink faded but still legible. The map inside bore a single marking in pencil, a small X, deep inside the Klein-Wernberg Ridge. On March 14, 1952, a Soviet chemical engineer named Anatoly Sidorov crossed into the British sector of Vienna under cover of night, carrying a battered leather satchel wrapped in oilcloth. He claimed to have defected from a classified aviation research bureau in Moscow, where he had been tasked with analyzing captured German aeronautical material from the Second World War. The satchel, he insisted, contained proof that the Soviets were developing an aircraft design never meant to be seen by the public. Inside were 12 rolls of 35mm microfilm, each labeled with the handwritten word, Kaiserprogramm. MI6 officers stationed at the Vienna field unit initially suspected the package was a lure for counterintelligence entrapment. However, a quick inspection revealed the images were authentic photographs, grainy but detailed, depicting skeletal airframes in vast underground hangars. None of the shapes matched documented Luftwaffe production models. Several images bore chalk markings such as V7B and Project 36A, along with stenciled signs in German reading, Nur auf Anweisung Dr. F. Bayer. The hangar walls were curved, suggesting construction inside natural caverns. One image showed a row of what appeared to be turbine housings without visible exhaust ports, their intake designs unlike any known German jet engines of the era. Cross-referencing these photographs with post-war Allied interrogation reports unearthed a peculiar match. In September 1945, an RAF intelligence officer had interviewed former Luftwaffe pilot Hans Eckert at an internment camp in Schleswig. Eckert described a hush-hush program for a quiet bomber that could cross the Atlantic at high altitude, evading radar. He claimed the prototype was housed in a mountain in the Baltic region and had been evacuated towards southern Germany before the Red Army advanced. The report was filed away as speculative and remained dormant for nearly 7 years, until the microfilm surfaced. The microfilm was dispatched to London via diplomatic pouch under the designation Package Foxlight. Only 5 individuals were authorized to examine it, including Group Captain Ernest Mallory of the RAF Technical Intelligence Section. On May 2, 1952, Mallory collapsed during a morning meeting and was pronounced dead of an apparent stroke. Just over 2 weeks later, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Harrison of MI6, another of the authorized viewers, died in a car accident near Guildford. 2 others suffered severe, unexplained illnesses within the year. By early 1953, the satchel itself had vanished from the locked archive cabinet where it was stored. An internal inquiry suggested it may have been transferred to a higher security vault, but no transfer logs were found. The only surviving physical piece of evidence was a single contact sheet, faded, edges singed, that had been left in a separate analysis folder. The sheet was later misfiled in a Cold War nuclear research archive, where it remained unnoticed until 1981. A marginal note on the sheet, written in an unknown hand, reads, Hangar F-12 equals Peenemund transfer site, March 45. Cross-ref with Gorlitz records. When archivists attempted to locate the Gorlitz records, they found the relevant files had been removed from Bundesarchiv Holdings in 1960 by an unnamed visiting technical team from an undisclosed NATO agency. Siderov's fate remains unclear. MI6 debriefing notes indicate he was relocated to a safe house in the Cotswolds in late March 1952. A final entry, dated April 7, states, "Subject transferred to joint custody for processing." No further references appear in British or American archives. Former KGB defectors have speculated that Soviet agents recaptured him, but there is no definitive proof. In 2007, a Freedom of Information request by an aviation historian brought partial declassification of the Foxlight cable traffic. One telegram, dated March 16, 1952, from the British Embassy in Vienna to MI6 headquarters, contains the cryptic line, "Item bears all hallmarks of Phase 3 aeronautics, beyond contemporary performance parameters. Advise maximum containment." The term Phase 3 appears nowhere else in the released documents. Aviation experts who have examined the surviving contact sheet point to the unusual curvature of the wings and absence of conventional control surfaces. Some speculate it may have been an early exploration into laminar flow control or even magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion, concepts decades ahead of confirmed post-war aviation technology. Skeptics argue the images could depict incomplete prototypes or even disinformation planted by German engineers to inflate their wartime achievements. One detail continues to trouble researchers: a blurred figure visible in one of the hangar photographs, wearing a long white coat and holding what seems to be a drafting tube. The coat bears a circular patch with an emblem not found in any Luftwaffe or SS insignia database. The patch's faint outline suggests a crowned eagle clutching a gear, above an inverted triangle. Attempts to trace this insignia through wartime uniform records have yielded nothing. The microfilm reels, if they still exist, have never resurfaced. Theories range from destruction in a classified incineration process to storage in an undisclosed NATO aerospace archive. The British government maintains that all known material related to Kaiserprogramm has been lost. One of the last public references emerged in 1998, when a retired Bundeswehr officer, speaking anonymously to a German defense journal, claimed that during a NATO exchange program in the 1960s, he was shown a photograph of an aircraft identical to the contact sheet's design. The image, he said, was displayed during a briefing on emerging strategic systems and bore the caption, "Origin, unconfirmed, 1944-45. Capability, classified." If true, it would suggest that the so-called Kaiserprogramm was not merely an abandoned German project, but the foundation for a post-war technological transfer buried deep within the layers of Cold War secrecy. And if any prototype or surviving airframe was indeed recovered, it has been hidden from history for over 7 decades, its existence confined to fading microfilm and the memories of a handful of men, most now long dead. On April 28, 1945, as American forces advanced toward Magdeburg, a reconnaissance patrol from the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, intercepted a lone freight car stranded on a siding near the Elbe River. The train's locomotive had been destroyed in an air raid 2 days earlier, and the rest of the convoy had been moved east by German railway crews under orders from the Reichsbahn. This particular car, a Type G10 goods wagon, was sealed with lead security tags stamped SS, Reichssicherheitsstamped. The freight car's manifest was missing. Its only markings were the word Gewitter, stenciled in black block letters on each side, and a set of serial numbers partially sanded down. OSS Field Officer Lieutenant Robert L. Caro recorded in his mission log that the car's metal exterior was unusually warm to the touch despite cool spring weather. When the doors were forced open, the OSS team discovered 9 wooden crates, each lined with lead sheeting and secured with steel bands. A faint chemical odor lingered inside, accompanied by a low metallic tang in the air. One crate had been damaged, revealing glass cylinders wrapped in waxed cloth. The cylinders were filled with a dense, dark liquid that emitted a dull shimmer under sunlight. An Army medical officer present, Captain Hugh Donnelly, ordered all personnel to avoid direct contact. The car was rerouted under guard to a temporary OSS staging area in a warehouse outside Braunschweig. Over the next 48 hours, Donnelly reported that 3 soldiers who had helped unload the crates developed severe skin lesions resembling radiation burns. One required evacuation to the 98th General Hospital in Munich, where he died less than a week later. No public cause of death was recorded. Investigations into the cargo's origin traced the freight car back to the Bomiš-Lepa railway junction in Czechoslovakia, departing on April 5, 1945. This junction had been under SS control and served as a primary shipment hub for material from the experimental research complex near Prague known as Werk Götzendorf. Surviving Czech railway clerks recalled that the Gewitter car was guarded by a unit of Waffen-SS troops who refused to allow inspection, even by German railway police. OSS records indicate that Werk Götzendorf was operated under the authority of SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, architect of several underground production sites. Intelligence reports from 1944 suggest the facility was associated with Sonderprojekt Gewitter, believed to involve high-energy experiments with potential military application. The nature of these experiments remains unclear, though some intercepted German communications referred to Kernladungsträger, literally, core charge carriers. The Gewitter freight car was transferred by the OSS to the port of Antwerp for technical assessment in mid-May 1945. Shipping records show it was loaded onto a Liberty ship bound for New York, consigned to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. From that point, all documentation ends. The vessel's manifest does not list the Gewitter car or its cargo, and no arrival report exists in Army Transportation Corps archives. Captain Donnelly, the medical officer, was reassigned to a classified Army Medical Department unit in 1946. He retired in 1959, never speaking publicly of the incident. His personal papers, donated to the University of Maryland in 1987, include a single page of handwritten notes marked Private G Case. The notes describe rapid tissue necrosis in the absence of heat trauma and possible neutron exposure, source unconfirmed. The page is undated. In 1968, the West German Bundeskriminalamt conducted a quiet inquiry into missing wartime freight documented by the Reichsbahn. An internal memo from that investigation, declassified in 2010, mentions the Gewitter car as presumed recovered by American forces and not accounted for in any Allied restitution inventories. The memo concludes, cargo nature likely classified under mutual post-war agreements. Former OSS officer Caro, interviewed in 1974 for an oral history project, alluded to one shipment that still keeps me awake at night, but declined to give details. When pressed, he said only, "It wasn't a weapon you could fire. It was something you could open." In 1999, a decommissioned Belgian army sergeant claimed in a radio interview that in late 1945 he had been assigned to guard American railway wagons in Antwerp docks. One of these, he said, had large black letters reading Gewitter and was kept under constant armed watch. He remembered that U.S. personnel wore dosimeter badges and carried their own water rations, refusing to drink from local supplies. If the Gewitter cargo was part of a weapons program, no official disclosure has been made in the decades since. Its disappearance remains one of the least documented OSS seizures of the war's final weeks. The only physical relic tied to the case is a damaged lead seal from the freight car door, preserved in the Imperial War Museum and labeled simply "Recovered near Magdeburg, April 1945, source unknown." Whether the crate's contents were destroyed, hidden, or integrated into post-war research is an unanswered question, one shielded by layers of classification and the passing of every man who handled them. On the night of October 18, 1956, an unmarked convoy of 5 military trucks crossed the Austrian border near Spielfeld under heavy escort. Austrian gendarmerie records show the vehicles bore no plates and carried U.S. military personnel in unmarked fatigues, accompanied by a small group of British officers. The convoy's destination, recorded only in a handwritten customs log, was Obersteiermark, Alpen Sector 4. 2 days later, residents of a small mountain village called Tragos reported hearing sustained excavation noises from a wooded ridge above the valley. The work continued day and night for nearly a week, punctuated by occasional detonations. Local forestry officials, attempting to approach the site, were turned back by armed guards who identified themselves as Allied technical observers and threatened arrest for trespassing in a prohibited security zone. Declassified Austrian Interior Ministry files reveal that the operation was coordinated under the codename Harvest Fall and involved the recovery of an alleged wartime intelligence cache buried in the Styrian Alps. The cache had been left there in April 1945 by a rogue Abwehr intelligence unit under Oberstleutnant Rolf Kruger, whose post-war fate remains unknown. Archival fragments suggest Kruger's team had fled Berlin with documents implicating high-ranking Nazi officials in covert arrangements with Allied intelligence officers to secure their own immunity. Among the recovered items, according to a partially redacted 1957 Austrian police summary, were several reels of 16mm film labeled Urban Trials, Litzmannstadt, 1943. Surviving fragments of the summary describe controlled release of agents in occupied Polish city sectors, with civilian reaction documented over multiple days. The summary does not identify the agents used but notes that immediate mortality rates in excess of 30% were observed in test areas. Also listed in the police summary were packets of coded correspondence between Nazi officials and unnamed contacts in Argentina and Paraguay dated as late as January 1946, nearly a year after the war officially ended. The messages referred cryptically to cargo to be received under Winter Moon and new engines secured for long-range program. No complete translations survive in the released files. By October 26, the convoy departed the excavation site and re-entered the Austrian highway network without filing exit documentation. Satellite photographs from U.S. reconnaissance flights taken that month, recently declassified, show disturbed earth and temporary tent structures at the dig site, but no heavy equipment left behind. Within months, Tragos experienced a slow exodus of its residents, with Austrian census data recording a population drop of 43% between 1956 and 1960. No official reason for the depopulation is recorded. In 1964, an Austrian journalist, Karl-Heinz Kapp, began investigating Harvest Fall after receiving a bundle of anonymous photographs showing military trucks loading wooden crates into a transport aircraft at Grasthalerhof Airport. Kapp's series of articles was abruptly cancelled after the second installment, and he left Austria soon afterward. His whereabouts remain unknown. His last confirmed sighting was in Buenos Aires in 1967. A British Foreign Office cable from December 1956, released under the UK's 30-year rule in heavily redacted form, notes, "Matter resolved under joint intelligence protocols. Recommend all public inquiry be directed to Austrian civil jurisdiction, our involvement to remain officially nil." No further references to Harvest Fall appear in the unsealed British archives. Survivors from the village of Tragos have since claimed that the ridge above their homes remains cordoned off, now marked as a wildlife conservation area, with heavy fines for entry. Austrian military mapping data lists the sector as unsurveyed. When approached in 2008, the Ministry of Defense stated that no record of any restricted zone exists for that location. The known details of Harvest Fall suggest a deliberate effort to remove sensitive wartime material outside standard restitution processes, and possibly to conceal evidence of crimes that, if revealed, would have compromised post-war political alliances. Whatever was in those crates now lies beyond public reach, its contents locked away in the archives of agencies that deny its existence. On September 3, 1946, the Royal Navy trawler HMS Calder, conducting post-war mine-clearing operations off the coast of Tromsø, Norway, snagged its sweep gear on an unidentified obstruction 22 nautical miles offshore. When the crew winched the gear back aboard, they found it entangled with a steel container roughly 2 meters in length, heavily corroded but still bearing the faint outline of the Reichsadler, the Nazi imperial eagle, stamped into the metal. Below the emblem, in flaking white paint, were the words "Nur für Admiralität," for admiralty use only. The container was hoisted onto the aft deck and inspected by Lieutenant Commander James Brooks, who noted that it appeared to have been deliberately weighted with iron ballast. After chipping away layers of marine growth, a rust-seized locking mechanism was forced open. Inside, carefully wrapped in oilskin, were several parchment charts of the Arctic Ocean, each annotated in red pencil with cryptic meteorological symbols and strange sonar-like tracings along the Greenland and Barents sea shelves. Folded among the maps was a bound logbook containing coordinates, tidal notations, and temperature readings spanning 1943 to early 1945. Also inside was a smaller waterproof canister containing what appeared to be photographic negatives. The ship's purser, an amateur photographer, identified them as large-format aerial images of ice fields, some showing geometric shapes beneath the surface. These images were unlike anything in Royal Navy hydrographic archives. The Calder's captain radioed the Admiralty, and the container was ordered transferred to Portsmouth under technical escort. No further mention of its arrival appears in public naval records. A 1983 parliamentary inquiry into missing wartime artifacts revealed that no accession number was ever issued for the container, and its supposed storage location, listed in a 1947 ledger as Building 7, Vault C, had been demolished in the early 1960s. Survivors from the Calder's crew later recounted that shortly after retrieving the container, several men experienced persistent nausea, dizziness, and a low-frequency humming sound that seemed to emanate from below the deck when the container was nearby. The ship's doctor attributed this to exposure stress, but the symptoms vanished after the container was removed at port. Historians have attempted to trace the container's origins through captured Kriegsmarine logs. One partially decrypted signal, transmitted from the U-boat U-977 in January 1945, refers to cargo K-92 delivered to Polar Depot. Await further orders from OKM. U-977 is known to have surrendered in Argentina in August 1945 after a 66-day submerged voyage, a fact that has fueled speculation about post-war escape routes and hidden polar operations. Norwegian fishing records add a further mystery. Several captains from Tromsø claimed that in the late 1940s, their sonar equipment began picking up unexplained returns from deep water near the Calder's recovery site. They described the source as stationary, with dimensions larger than a trawler. When Norwegian naval patrols investigated, they reported no contact, but fishermen maintained that the humming beneath the waves continued for years. In 1961, a Royal Navy hydrographer named Thomas Henslow, who had worked on Arctic mapping during the war, privately told colleagues that he had once been shown a German chart from 1944 depicting under-ice structures in the Fram Strait. He claimed the chart was nearly identical to the red-marked maps rumored to be inside the Reichsadler container. Henslow's notes were found after his death in 1975, but the chart he described was never located. Today, the fate of the container and its contents is unknown. Officially, no such artifact exists in British naval custody. The Norwegian government, when asked about the 1946 recovery, states that no records survive from that period of mine-clearing operations in the Tromsø sector. The coordinates recorded in the Calder's logbook for the recovery site are now within a restricted maritime zone, off-limits to civilian vessels without special clearance. Local fishermen still speak of the humming, a low, almost imperceptible vibration in the hull that seems to pass up through the floorboards when their boats drift near the old coordinates. Whatever the Royal Navy recovered in 1946, it was not a simple relic of the war, and its disappearance has left behind only silence, save for the faint sound that some say still rises from the depths. Some truths don't fade with time, they sink deeper, until even history forgets where they fell. Yet every so often, something rises, a whisper from the cold earth, a glint of metal in the dark water, a name in a file not meant to be opened. You can seal the doors, burn the papers, and silence the witnesses. But the silence remembers everything.